I believe that in the bottom of Mystic Lake in Montana there is an underwater UFO base. Let me tell you why I think so. Back in September 9th of 2009, I was hiking and fishing in the Beartooth Mountains in south central Montana. I hiked about 10 miles up this long steep trail and went fishing in Princess Lake and Huckleberry Lake, caught a bunch of cutthroat trout, and then hiked 10 miles back. It was a long day, had a lot of fun, caught a lot of fish. But the interesting thing is that about 5 miles along the trail, I reached Mystic Lake. Now Mystic Lake is a long lake, it's about a mile long, 400 feet deep. It's a natural reservoir which has been made a little higher by some man-made walls that they put on it. It's kind of a narrow lake. When I reached the middle of Mystic Lake, the trail kind of runs along it, I saw these long diagonal white lines that stretched across the entire middle section of Mystic Lake. And I was wondering, what are these lines? At first I thought that someone would put these white ropes that were floating on the water across the lake. And then upon closer inspection I realized that those weren't white ropes floating on the water. They were little lines of little white foam bubbles. Now it was a little windy that day, and the wind was creating waves, and the waves were generating these little white foam bubbles, which is very common on lakes. But what was very uncommon is that these little white foam bubbles were forming these long diagonal lines that stretched across the entire midsection of Mystic Lake. It was very mystifying. Now, I looked at these and I was bewildered because I have degrees in computer science, music, and physics. And when I studied physics, I took wave theory. I understand how waves work. When waves go along a lake, the shoreline creates a drag and the waves always kind of bend towards the shoreline. You never have the waves going in a perfectly straight line across a lake. That never happens. And you never have lines, straight lines going across a lake like this. It would never happen. There was some force, something that was creating these straight diagonal lines across the lake. Lines made out of little white foam bubbles generated by the waves. The only thing that I can think of is that there is a UFO, an alien UFO base station underwater in Mystic Lake. It makes perfect sense to me because I've heard many times that there are underwater UFO base stations in the ocean or other places. In that area of Montana, there's no other lakes that would be good. There's Yellowstone Lake about 100 miles south, but that lake is big and it's deep, but it's too popular, too many tourists all around it. So the aliens wouldn't want to go to that place. Mystic Lake, you have to drive about 30 miles over a dirt road just to get to the trailhead. And then you have to hike 5 miles up a very steep mountainous trail to get there. You can't take any motorized vehicles to get to Mystic Lake. So it's a very remote area surrounded by a lot of rough mountains and very few people there. It'll be a great place to have a UFO base station underwater. And I believe that that base station somehow had some machinery or apparatus or electronics or something that was creating these, what we call standing waves, that was causing the little white foam bubbles to stay in a straight line across the center of the lake directly above the base station. This may have been to create a grid work of some sort to maybe make it harder to detect the base station by satellite surveillance, or maybe make it easier for the base station to come and go, something like that. I'm not sure exactly what, but the only thing that makes sense that could have been causing those white lines would be a UFO base station. There are aliens all over the place out here. You never know when there's an alien watching you or an alien base station in a nearby lake. But I'm sure that in Mystic Lake, there's an alien UFO base station down there. Aliens are among us. You'd be surprised where you can find them.